We gather together tonight to give thanks for StLuke Lutheran Church and to celebrate 50 years of ministry in Albuquerque and beyond. On April 11th, 2004, Easter Sunday, StLuke celebrated the 50th anniversary of its organization. Founding pastor Don Simonton came from Colorado to preach the sermon on this momentous occasion and to celebrate with us. Over the past 50 years, StLuke has had 5 pastors, 7 associates, 3 interims, 1 deaconess, and 6 interns. StLuke's origin dates back to June the 22nd, 1952, when a survey of the Inez Hoffmantown neighborhoods indicated the need for another Lutheran church to serve a growing Albuquerque. The results were given to the Board of American Missions of the United Lutheran Church in America, and the proposal for a new mission church was approved. That mission church would become our StLuke. On February 4th, 1953, Donald C. Simonton, a student at Gettysburg Theological Seminary, was called to develop the mission. Pastor and Mrs. Simonton arrived in Albuquerque on September 8th, 1953, to begin the work of organizing the new mission church. Pastor Don remembers the tedium, the sweat, and frustrations of door-to-door canvassing to find prospective members, and then the delights when someone showed interest and offered to help. After 3 months of hard work, Pastor Don had generated enough community interest to bring 103 people together for the first worship service of a new United Lutheran Church in America congregation. That service was held on Sunday, December 6, 1953, at Sombra del Monte Christian Church. The first session of church school was held the following week, with 37 children participating. Members of Sombra del Monte offered to share their building so that worship services and church school classes could continue to be held on Sunday afternoons. That church is still standing today there on Utah Street, 1 block north of Menaul. 6 weeks after the first service, on January 17, 1954, the name StLuke's was chosen by a vote of the congregation and dedicated during the worship service. Yes, that is St. Luke's with an apostrophe S, which was later dropped in June of 1992. After a church service at Sombra del Monte, Pastor Don greets Oscilla Smith and her dad, Eugene. Her mother, Margaret, also in the photo, is still a member of St. Luke. Even back in 1954, St. Luke's members loved to gather for potlucks. This was one of the early dinners held in the basement of Sombra del Monte. The children had their own special place, known as the Kiddies' Corner. On Palm Sunday, April 11, 1954, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, St. Luke's Evangelical Lutheran Church held its service of organization at St. Timothy's Lutheran Church. The United Lutheran Church in America required 50 charter members to organize officially as a congregation. By the day of organization, 76 adults had signed the charter membership roll. 5 pastors participated in the organization service. Reverend Arthur M. Knudsen of the Board of American Missions delivered the sermon. And of the 76 charter members, 4 are still members today. Tom and Ruth Glauner, Carrie Edwards Skolnick, and Margaret Smith. After the formal organization, one of the plans for the immediate future included the construction of a temporary building in the Sombra del Monte subdivision. It all started with this airplane hangar, which stood far out on the mesa on a dirt landing strip operated by Harold Snell. He wanted to dispose of it and offered to donate land north of Menaul on Texas Street if we would tear down the building and remove the debris. Well, being an enterprising young congregation, we found a man in town who would demolish the hangar if he could have the scrap materials. Just like that, St. Luke's owned land for a temporary chapel. Charter members built the chapel from scratch. Here we see 4 of them working in the trenches to prepare the foundation. Sombra del Monte Church is in the background. Pastor Don recalls that the Armco steel building, which was to be the chapel, arrived in kit form. He drove up just as the truckers began unloading it on his front lawn. He had them reload and deliver it to Texas Street. In their excitement to assemble the new building, charter members only completed part of it that first day. The wind came up that night and blew most of it down and across the mesa. With perseverance, the assembly continued until it began to look like a real building. There were some days when we had all the help we needed. Other days, it was rather lonely. On June 14, 1954, at the same time that the temporary chapel was under construction, we purchased our first parsonage. The first sign for the temporary chapel was in place, and St. Luke's members were ready to start worshiping in their own building. Our first worship service in the temporary chapel was held on June 27, 1954. Now we could worship on Sunday mornings rather than Sunday afternoons in loaned space. The building became known fondly as the Tin Tabernacle. The inside wasn't very fancy, but it seated 130 people, had a little Hammond spinet organ, and it was ours. During the first service, as the ushers brought the offering forward, everyone was surprised as the bills flew from the plates and were redistributed among the congregation. The baffle hadn't been installed in the air conditioner. After the service, as Pastor Don greeted folks, the money was returned. On July 25, 1954, Donald C. Simonton was formally installed as our first pastor. Occasionally, we would hold worship away from the chapel. This was our first mountaintop outing. It's summer 1954 at Kramer's in the Manzanos. Here you see Mary Persons playing the portable pump organ. As the church continued to grow, 2 worship services became necessary. After the first service, the chairs were arranged in groups for the church school and then changed back for the second service. Now painted white with cupola and cross, the Tin Tabernacle looked more like a real church. In the winter of 1955, a second structure for the church school and for meetings was erected directly behind the chapel. A 1956 potluck shows again that eating has always been one of St. Luke's favorite activities. Some things never change. Here, Pastor Don is talking to Lois Sherwood. 3 of the men pictured here have beards, which was very unusual at that time. Men were challenged to grow beards in celebration of Albuquerque's 250th anniversary, and some did. Do you recognize Bob Maul at the right? On August the 8th, 1954, about 3 acres of land was purchased for a permanent church on Menaul Boulevard. 16 months later, the church council authorized the building program on December 14, 1955. It was then another 19 months before construction began. Here's Pastor Don at the site around 1956 or 57. Groundbreaking ceremonies were held on July 7, 1957. Among the special guests was Dr. Chester Simonton, Pastor Don's father from York, Pennsylvania. He represented the Lutheran Board of American Missions. Construction was underway. On October 20th, 1957, the congregation gathered for the ceremony as Pastor Don and Robert L. Wainwright laid the cornerstone for the new church. The cornerstone was a gift from the Wainwrights. Construction continues to move ahead. The church was finished, and it was time to move to the permanent site. This was the first of 3 proposed units of the new church. These buildings would serve as sanctuary, fellowship hall, youth center, church school, offices, and kitchen. February 9, 1958 was a big day. This was the day the new building was formally dedicated. The dedication service started with everyone convening at the Tin Tabernacle. There was a police-escorted procession up Menaul to the south door of the new building. In the procession were the Holy Bible, sacramental vessels, and flames from the altar candles in the Tin Tabernacle. The acolytes carried the flames on the wick of the candlelighter. The service started outside of the church, followed by the presentation of the keys from architect Ori Joel Holman to Pastor Don and Woody Adler, the Building Commission chairman. The words, "Peace be to this house and to all that enter therein," were spoken by all. The acolytes worked hard during the short trip and the outdoor ceremony to keep the small flames from going out. The altar candles in the new church would be lighted with these flames from the Tin Tabernacle. The pastors, acolytes, and then the congregation slowly entered while singing, "Open now thy gates of beauty." Reverend J. Benner Weaver, vice president of the Rocky Mountain Synod, delivered the sermon, dedicating the $128,000 structure. That afternoon, approximately 400 people attended a reception at the church. The church was not only beautiful, it was unique. Its uniqueness was derived from the artwork which was a part of the church. The presentation of the message and work of the Christian church in symbols is a traditional part of church architecture. These symbols at St. Luke's reflected the history of its locale in the form of plaques that were designed and painted especially for the church by Kiowa artist Albuquerque. It is believed that this was the first time that the richly symbolic style of American Indian art, so appropriate to the Southwest, was adopted for this kind of use. At the altar rail were 6 plaques representing forms of worship. 6 more plaques were installed in the narthex screen to represent forms of service and to remind those who came to worship that they leave to serve. Here Pastor Don and Al Mamade proudly show off the plaque on the face of the altar, which represents the Son of Righteousness. God and humanity meet in Jesus Christ, symbolized by the IHS in the middle of the Zia Indian sun symbol. The various borders represent the way, the truth, and the life. 14 months after the new church was dedicated, the congregation celebrated its 5th anniversary in 1959 with a cake that was a replica of the church building. In June 1962, Pastor Don resigned as pastor of St. Luke's, and on November 4th, 1962, the Reverend Dale Knudsen was installed as pastor. Pastor Knudsen and his wife Fern make an Advent wreath with daughters Noreen and Leanne and son Paul. On October 6, 1963, St. Luke's installed Sister Dorothy Stalder as part of the professional staff of the church. Sister Dorothy, a deaconess of the Lutheran Church in America, was primarily responsible for Christian education and youth work at St. Luke's, which by this time had 1,500 members. On Sunday, March 8, 1964, the second phase of the building program was launched with the groundbreaking service for the church sanctuary. There was a good turnout in spite of the snow. Emma Woodfield was among many people in the congregation who took the shovel and broke the ground. Phase 2 of the construction was underway. Over the next 6 months, the sanctuary slowly began to take shape. On September 20th, 1964, Pastor Knudsen laid the cornerstone in the front wall. Construction was completed in December, and it was time to begin worshiping in the new church. The dedication service was held on December 13, 1964, with a ceremony similar to the one in 1958. After a short service at the church next door, the congregation gathered outside of the new sanctuary. Pastor Leland Soker, president of the Rocky Mountain Synod, led the congregation in the opening statements. Pastor Knudsen was presented with the key to the building and unlocked the doors so all could enter the sanctuary. It was a glorious day. The stained glass windows, designed by Art Tatkowski, have no symbols but effectively use carefully placed colors to draw people to the altar. The unique three-dimensional cross, suspended from the ceiling, portrays God's reaching in the crucifixion and resurrection into human history. The 6 worship plaques, designed by Al-Mamadi for the first church, are now mounted on the curved altar rail. Pastors Soker and Knudsen proudly show off the new Son of Righteousness medallion created by Al-Mamadi for the altar. The plaque, which was made for the altar of the first church, was removed to the narthex in the new sanctuary. In the medallion, the moccasin tracks move clockwise toward Jesus, and in the plaque they move counterclockwise away from Jesus into the world. 17 years later, on December 20, 1981, Phase 3 of the building program commenced with the groundbreaking ceremony for the administration building. Kermit Leislow, chairman of the Executive Building Committee, was among those to break the ground. The new addition was north of the Education Building and west of the sanctuary. Construction was completed in September 1982. The dedication service was held on September 12th in the courtyard between the buildings. In 1997, a major renovation project was undertaken. Demolition of the education wing was started on June 2nd, and construction followed. The narthex was doubled in size. A new kitchen adjacent to the fellowship hall was added. Dedication of the new and remodeled facilities took place on the weekend of April 18th and 19th, 1998. A catered dinner and program with former Associate Pastor Ben Larzalier acting as Master of Ceremonies and Storyteller was held on Saturday night. Following, Pastor Don Simonton was guest preacher for the festive Sunday dedication service. During the first week of March 1999, we accepted delivery of our magnificent Cassavant Frere pipe organ from Quebec, Canada. Installation began that same week. Getting the organ up and into the choir loft was a major feat. Assembling the 25 ranks of pipes required precision and skill. Within 4 weeks, on March 28, 1999, the organ was ready to be played during Palm Sunday worship services. Many years of hopes, dreams, and prayers were finally realized. The first 50 years, as we look back, we are amazed. Tonight we give thanks for our rich heritage and tradition that started with those 76 charter members who had a vision for this wonderful church. Although the names and faces have changed, the symbol and sign of our presence in the Northeast Heights remains the same. Our ministry to serve as God's people here in Albuquerque. And we accept with joy and thanksgiving our call to join with God and with each other in a ministry to all people.